Georgia Clancy, and I would like to welcome you to sharing childbirth experiences, choices, challenges, and conversation taking place today as part of the ESRC's Festival of Social Science at the University of Warwick. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm delighted to be joined today by a panel of three brilliant experts who are all leading lights in the maternity landscape with a wealth of knowledge between them. So please do send in your comments and questions for them using the chat box. I'll start the introductions. We have Nadia Hixson, who is a trustee at the Association for Improvements in the Maternity Services, also known as AIMS. There's Nadia.
Hello.
We also have Alicia Burnett, who is a midwife.
Hello.
There's Alicia. And we have Anna Madeley, who is a midwife and also a doctoral researcher.
Hey.
Thank you all so much for joining me today and being our experts. I'm so excited to have all three of you with us. And to everyone watching, please say hello in the chat. Tell us what brought you to the event today. We'd love to know who we're speaking to, who's out there. Are you currently pregnant or recently given birth? Do you work in maternity care? Are you a researcher? Are you representing a charity? Let us know what piqued your interest in the event today. So we're going to begin the session today with a video. It's Danielle's childbirth story, and that's going to kickstart our discussion, particularly around childbirth and the complexity of choice in reality. So please put your thoughts and questions in the comment box, and we'll be discussing those afterwards. Hopefully we'll just get the video queued up and then we'll be ready to go.
I desperately wanted a baby. I thought about names, the things that we do together, what my life would be like as a mother, but I'd never really thought about how I would become a mother, about birth. When I was pregnant, a lot of people would tell me stories about their birth experiences. One of my friends said that she went into hospital and it was really busy. Her labour was progressing quite slowly, and then a doctor eventually came in and asked the nurse whether she'd had an epidural, who said yes. So he just cut her. Didn't even ask her, just said something about being really busy and needing to hurry it up. I mean, can you believe that someone would do that to you without asking? Well, that totally freaked me out, and I started panicking about that things would happen that would be completely out of my control. My partner and I talked about different birthing options with our midwife, and we decided to go to the birth centre at the hospital. I quite like the idea of having a water birth, and lots of the midwives were trained in things like aromatherapy and reflexology. Yeah, I felt like I was going to have a spa experience, not have a baby. I mean, it just felt like the best option at the time, you know. As a first-time mum, I'd hate to be in the wrong place in case something went wrong. A bit before my due date, I could tell that something wasn't quite right. So my midwife checked me over and suggested that we go to the hospital for a scan. The scan showed that the baby was in the right place, but there was too much fluid, which could lead to all of these extra problems, like the baby might not be very healthy, there could be bleeding, a prolapsed umbilical cord. I mean, I didn't even know what a prolapsed umbilical cord meant. They knew that I was planning to go to the birth centre, but the consultant suggested that under the guidelines I give birth in the labour ward. They said that it was my choice, but it didn't really feel like a choice. You know, I was just told that all of these terrible things might happen and that I should give birth in the labour ward. I mean, where's the choice? I was starting to panic, and so I called my usual midwife, and just talking it over with someone who knew the birth that I wanted made a huge difference. They explained what would happen if I stayed in the hospital, or that I could sign a disclaimer to say that I was leaving against advice. But the thought of doing that was really scary. Would it be my fault if something went wrong? Eventually, I decided to stay at the hospital, but I was disappointed. You know, I just wanted to be a normal mum, having a normal baby, but at the end of the day, I wasn't going to put my baby at risk. Anyway, it turned out to be the right decision because I ended up being induced. I didn't really know what was happening at the time. Some women were given tablets. I had my waters broken and then waited to start dilating. They moved us into a room and said that the baby needed monitoring. I was pinned to the bed with a machine, getting more and more anxious. I felt trapped. I felt like I wanted to move around, but everyone else seemed more concerned about monitoring the baby than noticing what I needed. After a while, they put me on a drip. With a couple of hours, I was in full-blown labour, and eventually I had my baby. The staff were all quite impressed because I didn't have to have an epidural. Apparently, most people who have the drip have one, but I said that I could do it with gas and air, and I did. After I'd given birth, we were moved from our private room to a ward with other mums and newborns. By then it was getting late and my partner had to leave. I didn't really know where I was. I'd just gone from this private room to being alone in the dark on a ward. Well, then that was when my baby decided to do the biggest poo ever. I was struggling to see with this one tiny spotlight, and I never changed a nappy before, and all this horrible sticky stuff was everywhere. A nurse walked past and said, "Oh, is that your baby crying?" And then just carried on walking. And it made me feel really bad, and I just wished that I'd had someone with me because I didn't really know what I was doing. I lay there, wide awake, in the dark, adrenaline still pumping from giving birth, praying that my baby wouldn't start crying again. The next day, the euphoria of giving birth had completely long gone, and I was exhausted. I just wanted to get out of there. Like, I literally stood in the corridor and said, "Please discharge me and let me out." There was all this paperwork to complete. My baby still had a tag on. And I remember thinking, if I make a break for it now, will the alarms go off? Will security come after me for trying to leave with my own baby? You know, it shouldn't feel like that. When I started planning my birth, I thought that the most important thing was how my baby was born. But now I think the most important thing is how you feel about the way your baby is born, how you make sense of it. I'm still working on that.
Hello, welcome back. So that was Danielle's childbirth story, and let us know, everybody watching, how that resonated with you and any questions it might have prompted for our experts, Nadia, Alicia and Anna. Let us know in the chat what you think. We've already had a couple of comments. Hello to Sophie and Julianne, who have commented. Julianne says that the story is very real, which is great to hear, that it reflects the kind of experiences that you have as a doula. So I think for me, Danielle's story really highlighted some of the complexity around the concept of choice in childbirth. You know, she talks about the factors which influence her own kind of birth preferences, her friends' experiences, why she wants to go to the birth centre. But then she's confronted with this uncertainty and changes to her plans. She's kind of told about new risks and advice to go to the labour ward. And Danielle kind of poses the question in that video, you know, is that really a choice? If you're told that there are all these risks and you're set, and the doctor says to you, you can go to the birth centre or the labour ward, it's your choice. is that really a choice? And so I'd like to kind of start this discussion by putting that to our experts. Do you think Danielle had a choice in that situation? And how do you think those conversations, which are often stressful and time sensitive, should kind of be facilitated? Can I start with Anna?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? So I think what I would say is there is a choice, but whether or not she was able to actually exercise agency in making those choices is a very different thing. Because often we talk about choice as this kind of nice polished thing that we present to all women in their pregnancy and during birth, but actually, like you've illustrated and like the story illustrates, that becomes more complex because of a number of external factors. So that the language around, well, you know, there are risks associated with your pregnancy and birth, but not necessarily providing baseline risk. What is that risk? Contextualizing it and individualizing those discussions for that woman, that removes that choice. So I can understand why she would feel that it perhaps wasn't.
Yeah, thank you. Nadia, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, well, I always think there is a line in Shrek 2 where Shrek says to Donkey, Donkey, you have the right to remain silent. What you lack is the capacity. And I think the problem that we have is that, yes, legally, everyone has a right to make choices about their own birth, what they want and what they do not want. The difficulty is, firstly, having the right information to really be able to make that choice. And as Anna says, somebody should be being told, what is the actual risk to me in my situation? Because they might feel very differently about a risk of, well, you know, there's a 1 in 20 chance this will happen, or there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that this will happen. So without that information, how can they really make a choice? I think the other question is about the way this information is framed. And so often it is, as the consultant in Danielle's story was saying, was, oh, you know, well, it's really very risky, and, you know, we really think it would be much safer for you to be in the labour ward, and biasing the argument, really, not giving it objectively, but trying to coerce somebody into taking the preferred medical route. And I think it's very interesting, there's wording in the new nice guideline on inducing labour, which I'm actually just going to read out because I think it is very relevant to all medical professionals. It's about induction, but it implies to anything else. Recognise that women can decide to proceed with, delay, decline, or stop an induction. Respect the woman's decision, even if healthcare professionals disagree with it, and do not allow personal views to influence the care they are given. And until we've got all healthcare professionals understanding that that is what they should be doing, it's going to be very hard to make a choice.
Absolutely. Thank you for finding that resource so quickly for us, Nadia. That's brilliant. And it reminds me of women's birthrights. You know, that is one of the fundamental birthrights that women have. Alicia, what do you think? Do you think women are aware of their birthrights and that right to actually decline as a midwife? And do you think midwives and doctors know that women have that right as well?
That's a very interesting question. I feel that women and birthing people fall into two camps. The camp that is very much aware of their rights in regards to childbirth, and the camp that have no idea or concept that it's your body, your baby, your pregnancy, your decision. Luckily, we do have midwives that will make partners and women aware that that is the case. You have complete agency in this pregnancy, but at the same time, it's not easy. The moment you become pregnant, you are bombarded with everybody else's opinions, what you should be doing, what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, what you can do in labour, what you can't do in labour. We have rights. They're enshrined in law, but you wouldn't notice, particularly now, considering all of the restrictions in place. I'm trying to be very diplomatic, but I'm not doing a very good job of that because I've just had a baby and I've just had to navigate all of this. And one thing I would like to say is that with choice comes, if you are to advocate for yourself and make those choices, with that choice comes a burden of responsibility. We are saying that you should do this. We are framing it as you have a choice. You don't really. If you choose not to go with what our recommendation is, if anything happens to you or your baby, it's your responsibility. And making a choice in that context is really hard and draining.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and you've hit onto something else that I wanted to raise, that issue of accountability. And you know, Danielle in the video says, well, would it be my fault then if something goes wrong? It's so difficult for women to try and understand, I suppose, how accountable they should be, and also for the professionals as well, who is taking that burden of responsibility. Do any of you want to venture an opinion, or maybe?
Well, perhaps I can say something on that. I think actually you are always responsible for your own actions. That is life. That is something we all have to be aware of. Deciding to do what the medical professionals tell you is also a decision, and that may also have consequences. And so I think it's really important for people to think through, or to, and also to be informed about what are the consequences of all the alternatives that are open to them. And people are probably familiar with this little decision-making tool, Brain, asking about what are the benefits of whatever's being suggested, what are the risks, what are the alternatives, including the N, which stands for, well, do nothing and just wait and see how things develop. But the I always feel the I in Brain is the really important bit, because the I is, having got all of that information, how do I feel about those options? And I feel if people have made what felt like the best decision at the time for the situation they were in, then hopefully, however things pan out, they will not feel that they carry any blame for that. They have done their best with the information they had.
I just wanted to mention and sort of support what Nadia is saying. And when we talk about those kind of consequences of decision making, the literature on the whole supports the fact that women don't make decisions on a naive basis. They absolutely make those decisions understanding quite complex discussions around risk and framing it within their own personal experiences. And that sits comfortably with most women when they make decisions. And certainly when I think about where my interests lie with women that make decisions outside of Guideline, or choices that might make healthcare professionals uncomfortable, the vast majority of the women that I've spoken to, or the literature that I've accessed, it's really clear that women, they're not naive in those decisions, and they do take responsibility. I think where the issue comes is where those decisions have been made and those thought processes have happened, and then perhaps healthcare professionals come along, don't agree with those or their rationale, and then the coercive behavior happens, which, I'm not saying it happens with everybody, because it doesn't, but it happens, and we have to acknowledge that. And it's not always overt coercive behavior that you and I would stand and think, wow, why they said that. It's the drip undermining of women's decisions, women's ability to birth their babies and have a pregnancy in the way that they want to experience it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a lot of the comments that are coming in are kind of echoing some of the things that we're saying, which is really, really great to see. Julianne said individualized care is not just about physical care, but decision making and discussions around chance and risk. And she says she agrees with what we're saying so far, which is great. And lots of people joining us who are researchers or different types of maternity care professionals, which is really lovely to have you all here and joining in. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions that you want to pose specifically to our experts here about maternity. I think part of this kind of conversation around accountability is also about informed consent and making sure that you have all the knowledge available to make those decisions. How do you think, I mean, that's so complicated sometimes when birth is actually happening. How would you, as midwives, Anna and Alicia, actually kind of facilitate that process of trying to inform women in very stressful situations?
I think that is, I know we're talking about when birth is happening, but I think that's where discussions during the antenatal period are so crucial. I can't tell you how many times I bashed my partner over the head with our birth plan and discussed it with, I had an independent midwife and an NHS midwife, and we just kept going over it over and over again, because you have to bend and flex in a birth situation because things can change from one moment to the next. You may not want an epidural, but you may end up having one. And if you have it so fixed in your mind that I definitely don't want an epidural, and if I do have one, then I have failed in some way, then that almost sets you up for feeling disappointed in the end. Bend and flex and accept that things, you can't predict what's going to happen. So be easy on yourself, take it easy on yourself, and just consider different variables that may occur. And hopefully women are getting the support that they need in the antenatal period to help them prepare, and having a midwife at the time of birth who, if you want an epidural, you can have one, fine. I'm not going to try to dissuade you or force one on you. Just hopefully, so many things have to come together in that birth space for things to go psychologically well as physically well for mother, baby, and birth partner. Sorry, Anna, that was a lot of waffle.
No, I thought that was great. I would add to that and support that in terms of the antenatal education. And this is where continuity really comes into its own, because as midwives, we should be building trusted relationships with our women and our families, so that when we get to that point where we're supporting them in their choices in labour, that actually we understand how they think, we understand, and they trust us to be their advocates. At the core of what we do, we are advocating for the women that we work with and for, and I don't think we should ever lose sight of the fact that we work with them and for them, and they are the centre of the care, not us. So yeah, I have real high hopes for continuity across the UK, and hope that as it's implemented, that will reduce levels of trauma, it will reduce levels of fear, and that it will improve outcomes, which we know it will.
Yeah, thinking about how those discussions start antenatally, Julianne has raised the sort of issue that appointments can be so short. Do you really have time to get into the kind of in-depth details of everything, I suppose, that might happen, and just how flexible you have to be? I suppose part of that discussion is kind of saying you can't know everything, and that's okay. No one expects, women to know everything about birth. They're not the experts. That's why you hopefully have good people around you to support you at that time. I don't know. I mean, short appointment times is a problem we see across the NHS, isn't it? Really, in all facets.
Can I perhaps just come in there, Georgia? Because I think Anna's mentioned about continuity of carer, and I think the hope is that if that is put in place in the right way, and I think that's absolutely key, that it's done properly and it's done sustainably and it works for midwives as well. Hopefully that gives midwives that more time to actually get to know that person and what they want, and to be able to give them the information that they need. So it's not kind of bombarding them with everything if it's not relevant, but actually tailoring it to the individual. And I think, in many ways, we know the answers to this. We know continuity of carer would improve things. We know genuinely personalised care plans would improve things. But it is getting those in place that is the real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been new guidance recently published on continuity of care, which I think you're alluding to, about how they're going to try and put this into practice, which we kind of have to now wait and see how that actually goes. Do you three think that actually sort of all women having continuity of care is going to be an achievable goal?
I think it should be. I think the trouble is it's actually a major change. It is a whole change in the culture, in the structure, in the way of working. And I'm not sure that many trusts have really taken on board the scale of the change they need to make. And it requires a proper change management process. It's not just something you bolt in. So that is the challenge now, to actually get management thinking properly about what they need to do to make it work.
Can I quickly add to what Nadia's just said? Another thing that I found is that continuity is almost down to interpretation. So continuity could mean that you have 2 appointments with one particular midwife and you never see them again. Whereas in other places, you have the same midwife at booking, antenatally, at birth and postnatally, and they're on call, and there are on-call systems, and there's a lot of variation. And continuity, it's not really up for debate what continuity is. You either have it or you don't. But I feel that that label gets slapped onto a lot of teams at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, and that ties in with a comment that's come in actually, which is about, because continuity of course starts antenatally, but it goes to, I think, is it 6 weeks postnatal? Technically, continuity is meant to continue. And Grace, the postnatal doula, she asked the question, she wants to hear the panel's thoughts on postpartum care and the current situation.
I think postnatal care has always been, I've always heard it described since I trained as the Cinderella service, because it tends to be the element of service that gets so neglected. And when you look at the public health messages that we're trying to, and the public health, never mind public health messages that we're trying to support around infant feeding, and how then that influences later birth, later pregnancies, the opportunities for us to provide education. I would agree that postnatal care needs more. We need more. Yeah, it's so important.
And I think one thing that is a very much a neglected area is actually helping people to come to terms with what happened in their birth, because if it hasn't been a good experience for whatever reason, people do need the space and the help to process that. And I always remember I'm on the local MVP for my local trust, and we were doing a listening exercises, going out some new mum and baby coffee mornings and just saying, did you want to feedback anything about your care, good or bad? I had one woman break down and cry because she had had a cesarean. She did not understand why she had had a cesarean. No one had talked to her about it. No one had ever asked her how she felt about it until that point, and her baby was a year old by that point. And I think the impact that can have on someone's mental health and ability to cope as a parent is huge. And that is an area which is really not being addressed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we've had a comment from Eleanor, who is a PhD student who is looking at traumatic birth and PTSD. So fingers crossed, there's going to be more great research coming out in this area to help improve these experiences and the services. And I suppose, we're kind of moving into this area of birth trauma, and obstetric violence is becoming kind of increasingly part of that conversation as well. I think, Nadia, that example you just gave about a woman not understanding why she'd had a cesarean, might fall into that kind of category of obstetric violence. In the video, we saw Danielle talk about her friend experience who kind of had a episiotomy performed on her without her consent. I wondered, because I know, Nadia, that this is part of the work that AIMS is doing at the moment, if I could ask you to kind of introduce the topic of obstetric violence for the audience, and
Yes,
also kind of give us Ames's position and what you're currently doing on that.
Certainly is. Well, in fact, we are just about to publish a position paper on the subject. In fact, we're also just about to publish position papers on a number of the other topics we've touched on, so continuity of care, decision-making, choice of birthplace. They're going to be coming out really soon, folks, so do look out for them. They'll be on our website imminently. But yes, we've put together this position paper on obstetric violence, and I will just look that up and read you our key statement. So how we define it, because there isn't actually a kind of one single definition, and this is open for discussion, but we say obstetric violence is any form of disrespectful or abusive treatment carried out by maternity services staff during pregnancy, childbirth, or shortly after birth. And there are statements on this from the World Health Organization and from the UN. So it can be neglect, it can be verbal or physical violence, it can be breach of confidentiality, it can be discrimination, it can be medical procedures being performed under coercion, or, as with Danielle's friend, without consent. All of those would come under the heading of obstetric violence.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Nadia, for kind of explaining that. It's certainly a growing topic, which I think we'll probably see start to be incorporated more into policy documents and how NHS. I mean, I don't know does anyone know if there's any kind of training for NHS staff around the issue of obstetric violence at the moment? Is that
not that I'm aware of?
To be honest, yeah, me neither. Got to be honest, I only learned about the term last year, and I was still a student midwife, so it didn't crop up at all in my education. And when I think, or prior to reading that definition, actually, Nadia, when I thought about obstetric violence, I thought about applying fundal pressure. I didn't think beyond that to the way you speak to women, the way you touch them, the way you ask for consent before you touch. So actually, perhaps I've seen more than I actually realised.
And actually, I think there is a bit of a problem with that term, because violence, yes, people do tend to assume that means something physical in there, and obviously the definition is a lot broader than that. So whether it's actually the right term to be using, I don't know, but it seems to be the term that is being adopted to describe that.
That's interesting, Nadia, because that's the same sort of conversations we had around domestic abuse, wasn't it? Domestic violence. So that kind of replicates that, I suppose.
Indeed, yes. I think that's actually why the term has been adopted, because it does.
From a clinical perspective, from a registrant's perspective, I think each and every one of us working within or with maternity services need to reflect on how the way that we're perceived, our language, the way that we communicate, the way in which we gain informed consent, etc., can have an influence on that individual's experience and then their ongoing life. Actually, it's not, it can have some really profound kind of effects on somebody's day-to-day life.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I do is volunteer on the AIMS helpline. They're not as much these days as I'd like to. And we hear so many women who have been so badly affected by their birth experiences, and not necessarily because of anything physical, but because of the way they were spoken to, or that they weren't given pain relief at the time they were asking for it, or all these can have a very serious effect on people's mental health again.
Yeah, and we've had some people kind of sharing their experiences in the chat as well, with sort of traumatic or upsetting birth experiences, and the sort of time that it's taken them to recover. I mean, I won't pick them up sort of and promote them too much on the page, but they're in the chat for other people to see, because I don't want to. Thank you for sharing those stories. I mean, on a potentially more positive note, Sophie has asked, what are your thoughts on home birth increasing positive experiences and helping to lessen pressure on hospitals? whether
Well, I
we
don't
would
mind
see
jumping in here because I make absolutely no bones about the fact that I'm a home birth advocate. I write around home birth. I think, again, it's a complex issue. Those discussions should be being had, that is a place of birth that should be an option for and offered overtly at the beginning of a pregnancy. And then if there are issues around risk factors for women, then having those discussions around, if they ask for it, then exploring why, etc., etc. Again, the stats and the figures around home birth, we know, this is not new, and we've got more and more research coming out around home birth, and more data, particularly in relation to outcomes, long-term outcomes for women and their babies. So how do I feel? I've forgotten the question. I'm so sorry. What was the question? Oh, thoughts on home birth, increasing positive experiences and lessening pressures. I'm not sure it necessarily lessens pressure, because you still need to have staffing. There still needs to be a degree, all that the ongoing training, ensuring that people remain up to date and safe. So in terms of it lessening pressures on hospital, I'm not sure that actually necessarily is the case, but it definitely should be an option that's offered for all women who fit. I don't want to say that fit the parameters for home birth, but that's
Well,
how
can
it's
I just
offered,
say,
isn't
I
it?
query that. I say for all women.
Well, I'm trying to be very balanced, Nadia, because I don't want to say we should be offering it. We should be having those discussions and actually exploring what is exploring what women want. Why is it they want it? Why? Yeah, I'm probably not being very articulate there, but you know what I mean.
No. I know what you mean. But basically, I would say, it should be a choice for anyone, and so long as they are, aware of the risk factors and are, making an informed decision that this is still the right thing for them, then that shouldn't be taken away, and they shouldn't be being bullied or coerced out of that. It's just then in that case, okay, how do we manage these risks most effectively to make it as safe as we can? That should be the conversation that people are having.
I agree, and my background in writing is around planning and antenatal care and planning birth at home for complex needs, social, physical, etc. So I'm inclined to agree.
Just quickly, I completely agree with what both of you have said. It needs to be offered. There are so many women that don't even know it's an option.
Absolutely.
My background my ethnicity is Jamaican. And traditionally at home, my grandma gave birth to all of her babies at home until she moved here and then had her babies in hospital. So we're so far removed from our traditional birth practices. And it's not offered when you become pregnant, but actually more Black and brown women are opting for home birth because of, I don't like saying that COVID's had any benefit, but more women are now considering home birth as an option because they want to avoid hospitals, and more Black and brown women are having home birth. And I'm Black and I didn't know that we did that. I didn't know that was a thing. So home birth has led to more positive experiences from what I've heard anecdotally, and I would love to do further research in that area.
Absolutely, and I think previously there has been a disparity in the offering of options like home birth to all women. I think that there was a study that found that Black and Asian women were less likely to be offered home birth, less aware of it. But then once they were told about that option, they were kind of equally likely to want home births as white women. So there was a sort of a gap there in what choices are being offered, and how. I suppose, people are engaging all women in the services and the options available to them, because that's something that needs to be tackled, doesn't it, as part of that. All women having choices and making informed choices. We've seen Robin has said that she had 5 home births and she loves them. That's one. Let's see what other... Okay, so Judith has talked about social networks having a huge impact on how women know about home? I guess as she talks about home birth, particularly as an option. I wonder if actually to sort of open up that conversation slightly more, what kind of impact do you think social media and maybe the media as a whole, but that might be too broad of a topic, has on the public's perception of birth? Kind of, what is a normal birth, where birth normally happens, if it's safe or if it's risky. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I've been teaching NCT antenatal class for more than 20 years. In that time, I've seen the clients that I'm seeing increasingly afraid of birth. When I started, there was a kind of expectation that yes, a few people might need the medical help, might need cesareans, but most people would have a straightforward birth and it would be fine. Now people are coming expecting there to be complications and problems because they've heard it from so many of their friends. So many people said, "Oh, my friend had her labour induced and the drip, and it was terrible." And that's the mindset people are coming to birth with now, I feel.
Do you think people are more likely to share negative stories than positive stories? Is there a bit of a... Is it? I don't know. Is it almost a badge of honor to say I survived this traumatic experience? And is it almost embarrassing to say, oh, actually, my birth was easy? Because that other women do struggle. I don't know. Actually,
yes, I would say that is the case, because in the groups I teach, the one, and there may only be one or two who've had straightforward births, tend to just keep quiet. They kind of feel, don't want to make the others feel bad that I had what they didn't.
I wonder, though, if there's something in that in terms of, it goes back to what Nadia was saying before about postnatal care and those debriefing services not being able to access appropriate support through kind of the NHS route or any other route. I think social media potentially is a force for good, because where women are sharing negative stories, essentially what they're doing is they're sharing their stories with their tribe. They're debriefing. They're seeking validation, which they perhaps aren't getting from the services that are around them for whatever reason that they're not around them. I also wonder whether there is a correlation in the uptick of social media and discussions around childbirth, and the greater awareness that Leisha was talking about around human rights around childbirth. So actually, it's been hidden. It's been, didn't really. They knew their rights, but it seems to be that they know it more now, and I certainly would attribute that to the rise of social media and groups, whether or not there's any statistics to support that. But I would definitely think it can be a force for good and a force for not so good as well. It could be challenging.
I do agree that it can be a force for good. So I had a VBAC and I used AIMS, the Instagram, and the AIMS books to get myself in the right headspace. And I followed VBAC social media accounts and things like that, and really had to tell myself that I could do it, because I wasn't necessarily getting that feedback from the obstetric team. So definitely a force for good there. Just quickly going back to whether or not women are not embarrassed. I am a bit embarrassed and I'm scared to share my positive birth experience, because I don't want to make anyone else feel bad. And I don't want to look as if I'm a smug. I'm not. I'm just really lucky. In fact, I had an MOH and I still don't feel traumatized. And I'm also wondering if I should be traumatized. And it's a difficult balancing act. You'll have consideration for others, but at the same time, we also need to be able to talk about our own experiences. And that's where your support network really does come into play. My partner said, do all women go on about their birth so long? Because you do need to talk about it afterwards, whether it was good or bad. So social media is great, also not so great. And yeah, there is a bit of, unfortunately, not stigma around having a positive birth experience, but we're being considerate about sharing whether or not our experience was good.
Absolutely. And yeah, Judith has just followed up on the comment that kind of kickstarted that conversation, saying that women need to believe that they can birth safely before they can move on to even to consider sort of birthing outside of a outside of a hospital setting. So yeah, it's about, I suppose, the perception that birth is risky and changing that mindset. Jenny has asked, has the number / percentage of women having birth complications increased over time, e.g. Bigger babies? Does anyone have any knowledge about whether birth has sort of become intrinsically more risky over time?
I don't know that birth has become more risky. It has definitely become more medicalised. Because if you look at the statistics on the number of labours that are induced, it has rocketed up over about the last 5 years. To the point where, we're now getting something like a third of all labours are being induced, because the number of reasons being given to support induction, it's now, if you're too old, your BMI is too high, your baby is too big, your baby is too small, you had IVF, all of these. And so a great many more people are having their labours induced and then potentially having other complications as a result of that. And I'm not saying all of those inductions, are not justified. Obviously, you need to look at the individual circumstances. And again, it's down to the individual to decide about that. But that's definitely been a trend. I think that's had a big impact.
And there's also research that shows that where you give birth can impact the kind of birth that you have. So if you give birth in a midwife-led setting, you're more likely to have a more straightforward birth outcome. However, if you're closing the birth centres, if you don't have a home birth team, or you're redeploying your home birth midwives,
or if you're restricting who can access the birth centres because they're too
Absolutely.
old, have too high a BMI, whatever.
Despite emerging evidence from, for example, MPEU around women with raised BMIs giving birth in midwifery-led settings, etc. So we need to be really looking at the evidence and integrating it.
Yeah, thank you. I think a question that leads on from that from Carol says, what are your thoughts or experiences of supporting migrant women giving birth in the UK? Because I suppose with that was also going to maybe become with issues of ethnicity, perhaps language barriers, all these things which can kind of feed into those risk factors that can limit choices. Does anyone have any experience of working particularly with migrant women? Or is that something that the AIMS helpline is hearing more, Nadia?
Well, we do hear from some, and we certainly hear from some people whose first language is not English. Again, there seems to be a big gap in hospitals being able to provide interpreter services for women whose first language is not English. And that is something that has got worse during COVID, because if people were not being allowed to take a supporter, partner or other along to antenatal appointments, how could they possibly understand properly the information that was being given to them, or actually be able to make a decision on the basis of that, even if they had some English, if it wasn't their first language. So I think that is certainly an issue. And I think for migrant women, even accessing maternity care can be a problem, never mind if they actually manage to get into the system, just knowing where to go, who to talk to. We do get people saying, I've arrived in this country, I'm having a baby. How do I find a midwife? How do I find a doctor? Just not knowing.
Yeah, I think part of that as well just feeds into all of our, I suppose, kind of knowledge about birth as well is often, and a lot of our medical knowledge is based on white people and white bodies, often male bodies, not so much in pregnancy, but sometimes, and there needs to be much more kind of wider knowledge of how pregnancy and childbirth affects all types of women, all different types of intersectionalities, and making sure that there is, the appropriate care for women. I mean, like you said, you raised the point there about interpreters and limiting people going in and out of hospitals during COVID. And also, of course, that affected birthing partners as well. I mean, do you think there's an argument to be made that birthing partners should be able to stay around longer in birth? I mean, outside of the COVID conversation, I don't know if what the sort of time limit is on partners staying around.
Well, I think it varies from place to place, actually. So there's not a single answer to that. Some places will have very open visiting, others will put quite strict limits on it. But particularly so with COVID, I think some places have. There's quite a few hospitals around the country that are still only admitting partners for 2 hours a day on the postnatal ward, which, if you imagine somebody who's had a cesarean or an instrumental birth and having to cope with their own recovery and looking after the baby and that explosive nappy, and the partner's not going to be in till 3 o'clock, it's not good.
Could I just quickly say that it really goes against my midwifery heart, and I'm sure the midwifery heart of all midwives, to be on your way from labour ward to the postnatal ward and just saying to the partner, I'm really sorry, but as soon as we get up there, you've got to go home. It feels awful. It's nothing compared to how the partner and the woman feel, but it doesn't feel good.
No.
And it's really rubbish, and we don't agree with it. We know why we're doing it, COVID restrictions, but it's so abnormal. It's not normal. When you have a baby, you have your support network around you, and we're really sorry. We're really, really sorry.
I mean, certainly, we used to keep in the hospitals that I've worked at, we would ask partners before COVID to stay for inductions, because, I very much saw my role as not just empowering that woman to have a positive experience, but empowering her partner to be able to support, because, we've been in rooms where partners have kind of felt sidelined or they've not been part of it. And actually they are, and we need to be able to look at the family as a whole and be able to support them, to be able to support each other. Because ultimately, if you have a family that doesn't need a midwife postnatally because they feel that they've got the skills and they've got the knowledge to be able to take that forward themselves, then my job's done. I've done the best that I can.
Yeah, Julianne raises the point there that if asking partners to leave, asking maybe like doulas or independent midwives, I suppose, hypnobirthing specialists who might also be accompanying a woman in birth. If you're asking those people to leave, then you're potentially increasing work for the midwife on shift, and they might help to alleviate some of the strain. So maybe that's another argument for allowing more people to be around birth at the time, aside from the COVID situation and all of the restraints that has put on things. This might have to be our final question from Claire. She has said, when we talk about normal birth, it's confusing because the norm for birth is now fraught with intervention. Normal is not physiological anymore. I think physiological birth and how to support that is also becoming a hot topic in birth.
Yes. Can I just say, another of our AIMS position papers is about physiology-informed maternity services. Because, yes, I quite agree. I think there's been a whole storm around the idea of normal birth, and we had Jeremy Hunt pontificating about a normal birth ideology being behind some of the maternity scandals. And it's just not a helpful term anymore. But if we say, it's focusing on understanding the physiology and, as far as possible, working with the physiology, that's really what we need people to be doing.
It's just worth mentioning as well that the RCM have got a fantastic project going on at the moment, listening events around that. And it's not kind of a conversation that I'd want to get into at this point, but the RCM are doing some fantastic work around those discussions, because then it's not helpful at the moment, I think, with all the issues going on.
In fact, we've actually had a comment from one of the researchers who's working on that rebirth project with RCM, trying to kind of reach, I suppose, I think, a consensus on how we talk about different types of birth and what is normal birth. So that's really fortuitous that we've had that comment as well.
There you go. I've shouted out the RCM. Fantastic.
We've got an AIMS volunteer on that steering group as well.
Fabulous.
Brilliant. See, there's lots of good people doing lots of good work in maternity at the moment, trying to move these debates forward. And I'm so pleased that we've been able to have this conversation today as part of the Festival of Social Science. And I'm so pleased that you three were able to take part in this conversation and add all your wisdom from your years of experience. And also thank you to everyone who has joined us in the comments and written really interesting questions or been kind of brave enough to share your own experiences in the comments there. That's really fantastic to see. And I'm glad to see that lots of people seem to be finding this discussion helpful and useful as well. So that's really good. And also that there's lots of research going on to move these
really
issues
great.
forward. I think one final question maybe I would put to you three. Oh, we're already getting thank yous coming in, which is lovely. Okay, maybe I don't have time for one final question, actually. I might be being greedy there. But yeah, I suppose I just like to thank you all again for joining us. So we've got Nadia, who is our representative trustee of AIMS, and Anna, who is a midwife and also doing your own research. Anna, tell us quickly your research, because that's relevant to this discussion.
I'm exploring the experiences of women who make non-normative choices, so out of guideline choices, requesting care that isn't medically indicated, refusing care, declining care, that sort of thing. So whole gambit.
Yeah.
Thank you, Georgia.
That's brilliant. And also, Alicia, you are perfectly situated because not only are you a midwife, but you've just had the baby. So you couldn't be any more perfect for this discussion today.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much, Georgia.
Thank you.
It's been really interesting, and I hope people have found it useful. But thank you. It's been great.
I'd just like to thank the ESRC for funding this event as part of the Festival of Social Science, and also the brilliant team at Warwick who have made everything happen behind the scenes. And also just to let you know that this session today has been recorded and it will be available to watch back online at a later date. So that will be shared widely across social media when that link becomes available. And lots of people saying thank you and congratulations to you, Alicia, as well on the baby.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, everyone, for taking part. And hopefully we'll see you again soon for some more sessions like this. That would be lovely.